Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today. My name is Tara McQuinney, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. I'm a PhD student with the School of Social Work at Carleton University, and I work as a research assistant with the Community First Impacts of Community Engagement group, where I've been helping with the development of a toolkit for community organizations that are interested in research with academic partners. So welcome to today's webinar, Finding Your Community Campus Engagement Champion, How to Identify, Establish, and Grow Your Organization's Connections with Post-Secondary Institutions. We have 4 presenters with us today. We will introduce them as they present. So to start us off today, Jane Henning, Executive Director of the Volunteer Action Center of Waterloo Region, will introduce us to the Center's history of community service learning brokering. Jane is an active participant in the Ontario Volunteer Centre Network and continuously works to demonstrate the value of community engagement locally and beyond. She currently provides sector leadership through her work on the Board of Directors for Volunteer Canada and on committees for Wellbeing Waterloo Region and the City of Waterloo Neighbourhood Strategy. Jane previously served on the Steering Committee for the Canadian Alliance for Community Service Learning and the Steering Committee for Community First Impacts of Community Engagement. While her involvement in national work related to community service learning has stepped back in recent years, she and her staff continue to work closely with faculty and staff at Conestoga College, University of Waterloo, and Wilfrid Laurier University. And today, she is going to share with us how connections with these institutions were established through the Volunteer Action Center's brokering efforts. Welcome, Jane.
To begin, I'd like to just give you a little background on why we think campus community partnerships are important. Thank you. As you can see from this slide, our sector is a substantial contributor to the Canadian economy, and as such, we are an employer of note. So in addition to that, we have some of the highest levels of education across any economic sector. And that leads to great mentors for students as they learn to apply their theory from what they're learning in the classroom setting into a work environment. And in addition, we really see the potential for future employment in our sector. So there's lots of benefits. There are also challenges, and they're challenges that really require consideration. We provide many programs and services. I'm talking the broader sector now. Services, knowledge resources, but with limited budgets and human resources. And so if you understand that of the 170,000 plus registered charities and nonprofit organizations across the country, over 50% of those organizations have 0 staff. They're 100% volunteer driven. In addition, and then another 13% have only part-time staff. So with that knowledge, we're at about 30% of, or 35 to 37% of all charities and nonprofit organizations have the kinds of capacities to support the students as they come into our facilities. And, and with that, students cannot be our priority. Our priorities have to be the client group at the end. So there has to be a knowledge and a discussion up front about our capacity to provide the kind of support that students need and what we get back in terms of skill level, idea generation, their time, add some of that, some value back that makes it really valid relationship. As a brokering organization at the Volunteer Action Center, we are well aware of our responsibility to all the stakeholders. And so we look at conversations with the university brokers, the instructors, students, and our community organizations as we decide how we want to best connect and work. So with that little bit of background, I want to talk a little bit about the investment that we've made in becoming a broker from the community's perspective, because brokering relationships takes time. It takes a lot of work, finding the right connections, building the relationship, building the trust, both with the community partners and the post-secondary partners. And so we need to decide if the investment that we're making is going to bring the dividends that are needed for all the parties. And so that was something that we considered at great length when we started really pushing towards providing a service to our members in terms of a broker in our region. So the Volunteer Action Center of Waterloo Region began a formal process of developing a relationship in response to the increasing number of phone calls we were getting from professors, instructors, for placements for their students. Each year that number of calls, the number of student placements being requested was increasing. And so we started really looking for who were the professors, the instructors who were connecting with us on a regular basis, and started to really push for in-person meetings with them. And we also started connecting with the student body, and that was really through more co-curricular activities like Dawn's wanting to place groups of students out in the community. So we were really a two-pronged approach to building the relationships with, like I say, the instructors and with the students. And that was really helpful as we started moving towards a stronger connection. And that was, I'm talking about 2002 here, so about 16 years ago. This is why I'm saying it's a long process to build relationships. In about 2005, we, through the connections that we had built to that point, we were asked to be part of a grant writing process for what would become the Laurier Center for Community Service Learning at Wilfrid Laurier. And when that was successful, we were part of the original steering committee for that center. So that takes us into a really formal relationship with one of the major post-secondaries in our region. So once we entered into that more formal relationship, the next phase of our relationship really, I believe, constitutes one of the best practices I've seen in campus community partnerships across Canada. And I really, though that this situation or this best practice that I'm going to talk about right now is no longer active, it really was the foundation, or built the foundation, for what we have become in our relationships currently. In fall of 2007, with the support of Wilfrid Laurier and the steering committee for the Laurier Center for Community Service Learning, we formed a working group that was really focused on strengthening the capacity of community organizations. This working group got up and running really quickly. That was in about November of 2007. And really early on, we decided that if this was going to work in Waterloo Region, we had to bring all three major post-secondaries to the table. And so by March of 2008, so only a 4-month period, we had leadership from all three post-secondaries as part of the working group. We had held a community roundtable, which I have to tell you was during one of the worst snowstorms we've seen in March, and it was definitely a snow day for most. And yet, of the original 300 that had replied that they were going to be there, there was still over 100 that participated. So there was much community and campus interest in an open dialogue. From that, the working group came together in May and immediately formed two separate groups. One we called our macro group and the other our micro. The macro group really looked at strategic directions. It was focused on auditing, at least initially, on auditing all three post-secondaries for what were the resources and programs that were using, experiential learning at the time. The micro group was really focused on developing models and supports for community organizations to engage students. And so they held a number of workshops, panel discussions, best practices, working groups that would create and design new opportunities. These groups then worked together simultaneously, and then we would come together occasionally over the course of the next 3 years. But as with everything, relationships and circumstances change and evolve. And at the time, as much as we all valued the micro and macro working groups, the leadership from the three post-secondaries simultaneously resigned. It just couldn't have happened more completely at the same time. They all three retired, and that changed the dynamic from the post-secondary perspective, but also the Volunteer Center at the time received funding for a substantial project, so it diverted our energies as well. The great thing about it was it had created that foundation of strength, and the relationships were really solid. And so we continue today with relationships with all three post-secondaries. Wilfrid Laurier University has a really strong service learning program and has a variety of other community engaged programs that are supporting community organizations across Waterloo Region. At the University of Waterloo, the Student Union has built and established an on-campus volunteer center that we work with directly to and links directly with our database so that we can share resources and knowledge, and we mentor the students. And Conestoga College, which has always been much more decentralized in the relationship, continues to work with us through 4 of their departments, and then some of the independent class profs as well. So those are that gives you a little bit about how we started, and certainly we are really grateful for the relationships that we hold with our universities and post-secondary. And I'm going to turn the mic over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Jane. Now that we have a better understanding of how the Volunteer Action Center established ties with the various institutions in the Kitchener-Waterloo region, I'd like to introduce Lisa Jarvis and Shannon Pennington. Shannon Pennington is a Community Service Learning Coordinator with Community and Workplace Partnerships in the Department of Cooperative Education at Wilfrid Laurier University's Waterloo campus. Shannon works with faculty at Laurier and community partners in the Kitchener-Waterloo area to coordinate community-engaged partnerships for courses and academic programs at Laurier. Shannon enjoys taking a community service learning approach to building partnerships, incorporating collaboration, reciprocity, and high-quality reflective practices. She has been involved with the community service learning at Laurier for 9 years. Lisa Jarvis is the Manager, Community and Workplace Partnerships at Wilfrid Laurier University. This unit coordinates curricular community service learning and work-integrated learning experiences. Coming into this new role about a year ago and being back in Waterloo, Lisa is again connected to organizations and people in the nonprofit sector in Waterloo Region, where she began as a social worker in 2006. Lisa has lived and seen the transformative power that experiences like community service learning can have on young people, and believes creating opportunities for students to get out of the classroom and meet teachers and mentors in the community be in relationships with people who are different than they are, and reflect on these experiences can be a powerful tool in creating a more compassionate Canadian society. Together, they will share with us the development of their relationship with Volunteer Action Centre and how it works today. Welcome, Shannon and Lisa.
Thanks, Tara. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, as James described, Volunteer Action Centre, or VAC, Waterloo Region, has been a catalyst for connection and partnership building with local community organizations for the post-secondary education institutions in this area, including Laurier, and more specifically for our Community Service Learning, or CSL program. Given their large member agency group, the quality of the service they provide to their members, and their involvement and profile in the community, a partnership with the Volunteer Action Centre Waterloo Region is a no-brainer for us. They save us time and energy in finding, connecting, communicating, and collaborating with community partners. They've helped us to understand what's going on with the other post-secondary institutions and to work with them in ways that better meet community needs and also consider community capacity. If universities aren't working with their local VACs, they should be, and to do otherwise is a missed opportunity for the institution, for their students, and the local community. This is primarily because community organizations don't generally know how to access post-secondaries for partnership. And post-secondaries, and I'm speaking primarily from the perspective of someone who works at a university here, don't have a history and associated infrastructure for working with not-for-profits. An attempt was made through Community Service Learning and our partnership with VAC to broaden and diversify beyond partnerships that had already existed for field placement and informal experiential learning courses, going back to the beginning of our program, as Jane described earlier. During the early phase of experiential education with Laurier, so back to what were mostly field placement approaches, many of the partnerships were with local schools and organizations that were very close to campus, and those that students and faculty already had associations with. Volunteer Action Centre had and has a large and growing number of member agencies that represent a broad cross-section of the community. Laurier began to try to engage with community in a coordinated and intentional way through community service learning, and to do so in a multidisciplinary way as well. This was more easily done through our partnership with VAC. One of the most effective and innovative things that we did with VAC early on was to link our portals or databases for placement and volunteer opportunities, allowing organizations to post information directly for students to see on both the Laurier and the VAC websites. Further, there was a lot going on at the time with funding for CSL and other community-engaged opportunities at universities and colleges, a trend which we're seeing happening again now. Our local VAC was actively engaged at the table from the beginning, as James described, and worked hard to engage with Laurier, University of Waterloo, and Conestoga College, and to bring us together at the table. A move which I think has had dividends in terms of establishing and maintaining community campus engagement locally. VAC facilitated connection with community organizations and other post-secondary institutions that allowed us to expand the way we partner with them from the field placement approach to a CSL and community engaged learning approach, and to consider community needs and capacity.
So hello, it's Lisa speaking now. And where does that bring us today after that? You've heard the history of our relationship here at Laurier with the Volunteer Action Centre and how they partner with post-secondary in our region. And I can speak from the point of view from a lot of post-secondary institutions in Ontario now, that there's an increasing demand for experiential learning across the sector. And so that certainly means more placements, more students in your organizations. And for those who are listening that are part of a nonprofit organizations, maybe you've had more, back to where Jane started, more phone calls and inquiries from different people within universities and colleges in your area. And that's, again, because most institutions are trying to offer more and more opportunities for students to get out of the classroom. And so our relationship with VAC, a couple different resources that they offer. For example, they're a volunteer managers network, which our coordinators attend, allowing them to connect face-to-face with volunteer managers of the member agencies for VAC, and the executive directors network as well that I attend, again, to connect in a face-to-face way with those organizations, allows us to sort of keep a pulse on the sector and see what's going on, and also to help us monitor community capacity, which with this increasing demand for experiential learning, we are certainly concerned about what that means for community partners and their ability to welcome students. Again, these face-to-face opportunities, as well as many of the communications that VAC puts out and other resources they offer to us and to their members, we are able to uncover new opportunities for partnership. So whether it's a partner we've never worked with before, or more recently, I've been able to get the word out to member agencies about the I guess, broader opportunities we can offer them in terms of ways to engage with the university as we reorganize and are now offering different models of support. The other thing we find helpful with our relationship with VAC and in the current stage we're at is that we can connect with both VAC and their staff, as well as member agencies, on issues that impact our sector as well as the nonprofit sector. And for example, I would mention things like vulnerable sector checks that are required by volunteers within nonprofit organizations. The advice that they're getting from police about how to use them as a screening tool, and then what information we need to communicate to our students about the requirements that they're going to have to meet in terms of doing a placement with a nonprofit organization. So that's one example. Risk management is always another one in terms of insurance for unpaid placements, that kind of thing. So we've been able to connect, whether it's a theme at a meeting for the networks that I mentioned previously, or just for us to connect with staff about what they're hearing in the sector about these kinds of things that are affecting us as well. And I think our sort of deep connection and our intentional relationship with the Volunteer Action Center, it's also because we have this common goal of exposing students to the nonprofit sector while they're here at Laurier, to have opportunities to volunteer, to discover what they're interested in, what they're good at, their skills, their interests, and also then I guess have an interest in being engaged citizens in their communities when they leave here. The other thing is we want them to, and I think Jane alluded to this earlier, to see that their skills can be utilized in the nonprofit sector and that it is a viable career path for them in terms of finding employment in the nonprofit sector, again, once they leave Laurier. So just to give you a few examples for those of you listening from organizations that may or may not have worked with students before, we find that when we're intentional about our partnerships with organizations, we really work with them to find the best model that works for the need that they're trying to fill. And so we have a lot still, what grew out of a field placement model, still a 2-hour-a-week type placement model for community engaged learning that serves many partners very well. When there's a 1 to 2 hour program, like a youth basketball program at a community center, nutrition for learning within a school setting, a homework club for newcomers, for example, and these things to be staffed by student volunteers is very helpful. And so again, those placements serve our partners very well. But we're also finding that we want to explore other opportunities how we can serve our partners. And we've had much success with project-based models. Again, when we're really intentional about defining the scope of what the project would be, what the deliverable will be at the end, and how it will meet the needs of the organization, it can be very successful. So one example is we have a professor in our political science department, and over the past number of years, she's partnered with Reception House here in Waterloo Region. They support government-assisted refugees. And her students have done research in the community, participatory community-based research activities that have allowed them to produce policy briefs or program evaluation data that can be used by the organization to then advocate for future funding or new programming. And so that's been a very successful model. The other thing is, with this push for more experiential learning, we first discovered through our relationship with VAC that organizations might be more open to shorter engagements and what we call exposures than we had originally anticipated. I think our assumption was that the longer or the more time students can give, that would be more beneficial to the organization. And we're finding that shorter placements where students in our community music program are going in for 4 visits to an organization to more informally play music for them, that's a very interesting model to some of our partners. In addition, when exploring models that might work for large classes, we stumbled upon a partnership with the Integrated Drug Strategy with our local public health unit. And we're going to partner them with a psychology course called Drugs and Behavior, where students are going to create posters and or social media content that can then be used by the partner if they so wish for a campaign that they're doing. And so that, again, that model works for the class size, and it serves the purpose or the objective of the partner, even though it's not a sustained commitment over 20 weeks like some of our placement models.
Great. The next section we want to go through are just to provide you with some tips and pointers for finding campus community engagement opportunities in your communities. So the first section is working with your volunteer action center. Maybe you could say putting them to work, I guess, for you if you are a member agency with them. So as Lisa's mentioned, a really great way to do this is to attend meetings and groups that are sponsored by your VAC. So for instance, our local one, as we've already talked about, offers a few different groups that can get together to meet, often with a facilitator, guest speakers, that kind of thing, to help them out. And what you could do as a member agency is ask that if you have post-secondary institutions in your community, ask that they be included as regular attendees, as Lisa and I both are with different groups at VAC, or maybe as guests at particular meetings. You could also ask your VAC for connections that they might have with post-secondary institutions. Of course, Jane here has lots of contacts already, and I know is willing to provide those for her member agencies. You could ask your VAC to share post-secondary information on their webpage and their newsletters, etc., as ours does here. And then as well, you could look for community university or community college events. There's lots locally here, and that might require looking at some different community info boards as well as postings on campus websites, but those might be nice avenues. The next set of tips have to do with locating connectors on campus. And I understand for community organizations this can be daunting. What I would suggest is going to the websites as a starting point, and looking for key terms that might help to connect you with people or departments on the campus that can help to act as those connectors for you to get you in touch with perhaps others on campus that might make sense for your needs and interests and those of your organization. So if you're on a university or college website, you can look for key names or terms like CSL, Community Service Learning, the EL, Community Engaged Learning, WIL, Work Integrated Learning, Volunteering, Co-op, Community Engagement, etc. And those, again, might lead you to people, for instance, like myself, where I'm more than happy to act as a connector for community and campus. Look also for both curricular and co-curricular opportunities for partnership. So for curricular, that's really what I do here on campus as a community service learning coordinator. I'm working with professors and programs to understand their learning outcomes and needs, and then I'm connecting them with community partners and matching up those needs and interests. So typically there's lots of opportunities on campuses to get involved in those types of partnerships, but there's also co-curricular ones. So Laurier, University of Waterloo, and Conestoga all offer volunteer fairs on campus 1 or 2 times throughout the year, and are happy to invite community partners onto their campuses to share their volunteer opportunities with students at those fairs. There's also clubs that are often interested in getting involved with community, residence groups, athletics teams, fraternities, sororities, etc. Look for departments and programs that would make sense. If you have a need or a program where you need some volunteer support that has to do with sports and recreation, then a kinesiology, physical education department on campus would make a lot of sense. If you're looking to connect someone with something to do with newcomers or immigrants, maybe you want to connect with languages or global studies departments. So try to think of what programs make sense and just reach out to those departments directly. Look for faculty whose courses and research make sense for your organization. Again, what are your needs? Do you think it could be associated with research that might be happening? Typically in a university, you can go onto the website and actually look up faculty in different departments, and each faculty member has a page where they talk about their research and what they're doing. And if you think that your need, that your organization might link with that research, chances are a faculty member would be more than happy to talk with you about those partnerships. Campuses might also actually have a position where the person helps to coordinate some of those partnerships between research and outside organizations. In our campus, it's called knowledge mobilization. Lastly, don't be afraid to aim high. So sometimes reaching out to those departments and actually asking to talk to the chair or even higher positions can sometimes yield great results. Again, there's a move afoot right now. There's resources available right now at the post-secondary level to expand experiential education. So lots of departments are being encouraged to look for opportunities to get their students involved in experiential education, and they'd be happy to hear from a community partner who to contact them and talk about opportunities with them. I don't know if Lisa, Jane, want to add anything to those?
Oh, I think it's a good start, and we're certainly happy to take questions that the group might have, in terms of further tips or tricks or pointers that you might want to specifically ask about.
Thank you, Lisa and Shannon, for sharing more details about how your ongoing relationship with the Volunteer Action Center. And thanks again to Jane, Lisa, and Shannon for your presentations. So just to recap, today we have heard from our presenters about the Volunteer Action Center's brokering relationships between post-secondary institutions and community organizations to foster opportunities for meaningful, experiential, and community service learning, how this is beneficial to organizations and students alike, and the history and inner workings of this brokering process, including helpful tips on how organizations can find community campus engagement opportunities. So we'd like to take some questions from attendees now. I just want to remind you that if you don't have the chat box open, if you hover at the bottom of your screen and then click on the chat bubble that comes up. And while you're typing in your questions in the chat box, I'm going to pose some questions that we received in advance of the webinar. So we have a question here from Dan Fontaine. Do the presenters have any thoughts on economic development and community engagement in support of local work co-op programs? So I'll put that forth for any of our presenters to answer.
If you're looking into funding sources, I think that's the question in terms of finding resources to welcome a student or pay a student, if I'm understanding the question correctly. I don't know if Zach links nonprofit organizations to different grant proposals or types of funding that they can get. Certainly the Canada Summer Jobs grant is one that comes to mind in terms of finding funding to hire a co-op student during the summertime from a university. And I'm sure if you connect with the post-secondary institutions, either the co-op, career, experiential learning offices in your area, they may also be able to direct you to different sources of funding as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we do, if something comes across our plate, we certainly share funding opportunities with our members. It's not usually related to student engagement, however. It's usually around a project and that kind of thing. So I would probably do what you suggested, which would be to send them to departments on campus to see if they have some ideas. Great,
thank you. Well, please send in your questions if you have them in the chat box, but I have another question here from Jennifer Lazenby that was sent in earlier. Is there any advice for someone engaging with universities in Saskatchewan?
So I did, I know that question came in early, and I did try to connect with some of the people I know in Saskatchewan. Unfortunately, one has moved on to another university in another province, and the other has taken a job in community and isn't connected with the campus community work anymore. So what I would suggest, though, is that I do know that the Engaged Scholar Journal is published out of the University of Saskatchewan, and so that might be a great place to connect and engage with all kinds of community engaged scholarship, and they would certainly have connections to a lot of the most current and active professors and community organizations that are writing in their journal.
Great, thank you. Oh, I have a question that just came in here. It says, from Executive Director to everyone. I work with a small nonprofit organization in Northern Ontario. We engage and retain older volunteers very well, but our retention of post-secondary students could use some work. Do you have any advice for retaining post-secondary students?
Yeah, students just by nature tend to be transient. Certainly that's the case here in Southern Ontario. I'm not sure if it's the same in Northern Ontario. I mean, here students are coming to Laurier and Waterloo and Conestoga. A lot of them are local, but a lot of them aren't. So we know that they are going to be coming in the fall and then leaving again in the spring. And we've worked with our community partners long enough that the ones that we're still working with today, and there are a lot of them, and they're happy to come back and work with us, but they know that the vast majority of the students who are working with them through the fall and winter semesters will be leaving in April. It's always a great success story for us to hear from a community partner. They stayed on, our students stay on, or they said they were going to come back when they come back in the fall, and they did come back. I think often that's a bit of luck on the part of the community organization, but I know that the ones that do tend to appeal to students are ones that, first of all, have to provide them with some flexibility in terms of allowing them to have their schedule be a bit adaptable as their schedules change from fall to winter semester and then again into the summer. They're ones that really, and this probably isn't different from other volunteers, actively engage with them and ask them how their experience is going and what they think that if they think they're getting out of it, what they want to get out of it, and you know, how they can work together maybe to continue to evolve that position. But at the same time, a lot of students as well tell us that they're happy to get out of the academic reading, thinking, writing world and get into something completely different, or maybe they can even turn their mind off for a little bit of time as well. So I don't know if that complicates things or if that answers the question. I don't know if Jane wants to add.
Well, I think our aim from most of the member agencies that we work with is that once those students reestablish in the working world and get more comfortable in their careers, that they come back then. Because I think we've all come to the knowledge that students, because many of them don't stay in the community after. I mean, certainly we try to keep them in the community, but once they're done at school, often will be moving on to find their careers. And so if they've had a great experience through some kind of CSL course, or we're more likely to get them back at a future date. So I'm not sure that we're going to resolve for you in Northern Ontario, but just know that your experience is pretty similar to everybody else. And hopefully, and I think that we will see these students coming back once they're more established.
I think too, what we're trying to do at the post-secondary level is education with students around the types of transferable skills and competencies that they're gaining from their volunteer opportunities, whether they're curricular or co-curricular, so that they see that these skills, often soft skills, things like ethical awareness, appreciation for diversity, collaboration, teamwork, those are things that future employers are interested in. And so not to only motivate them by something that in terms of getting a job or build their resume, because we also want them to just be there because they want to be there. It's certainly something that I think will help organizations when students see that this is valuable for their own personal but also professional growth and development.
All right, thank you. So we did have a thank you from the person who posed that question. And I have another question that came in from Nicole. This one's directed for Lisa or Shannon. How do you gather feedback from your community partners with respect to the different models you use for your student placements, both short and long term?
Sure. So on a bigger scale, historically we have surveyed partners, used surveys to get information from community partners. At the moment, we are revamping a bit our assessment strategy or plan for community-based learning, and so the beginning of that is to do focus groups with community partners and faculty around our learning outcomes and some of the tools we're using. So with feedback from our community partners to see how interested or what their capacity is to complete a brief survey annually, that would be one way that we get feedback from them about the types of things that they want or how they want to engage with us. As well as some of the learning that they see on the ground, because they're the ones week to week with the students, and So we can have students talk about what they learned, but it's great to hear from the partners what they see in terms of transformation or learning. And so we will hopefully continue to do an annual survey, as well as some key informed interviews on a relatively continuous basis. The other thing in terms of determining with which model works, it's often just sitting down, this is the work our coordinators do first with maybe a professor in terms of the model that they want for their class, but sometimes it also starts with the community partner conversation. How do they want to engage with us? Or what would work for them? What is the need that they're asking for? Oh, it's okay, some research, and then we go and find a faculty member or a course that might match that particular project. And so what can be frustrating, I'm sure, from the organization side is the back and forth and the time it takes to get something up and running. We're hoping soon to have a project portal where organizations could post a project, and then that way, using technology to hopefully speed up that process of connecting a professor or some place in the university to that project. But it is a lot of what we do in terms of just sitting down with organizations and taking their big need and kind of whittling it down to something that within the scope of a class or maybe a year that students are working on something is reasonable.
Great, thank you. So I haven't had any more questions come in, so I'll just pose a question for Jane. What is it like to broker relationships between community groups and post-secondary institutions? Are there particular challenges or stories that you would like to share with us about this process?
I think, like I mentioned, it takes time and it takes investment in terms of investing energy, investing knowledge building. Relationship building is never just as simple as a connection. And so when we decided back in the early 2000s that we were going to invest energy into building the relationships with our post-secondary partners here in Waterloo Region, it was a commitment of staff time and with very little reciprocation initially, right? Because it takes time to build the trust and the understanding of how each other works. I also did go out and joined the Canadian Alliance for Community Service Learning Steering Committee so that I could learn what was happening in other communities across Canada and bring that back to this community. So like I said, there's a lot of time investment up front, I think, but the payout is really good because our members really trust that we can share some of their challenges with the post-secondaries without having to do it themselves. You know, a lot of times community organizations are reticent to stand up to the university because they're a huge resource in this community and they don't want to be seen as the naysayer. And as an intermediary, we can share those without having to share specific organizations or, you know, if important, we can get permissions from both sides to share. So it's just that sort of intermediary, the negotiator, and we're not in a position of any power, so we're non-threatening to either side because we're a very small charity in our own right. And so it really is all about seeing the potential in the community that post-secondaries bring and being really willing to invest time and energy into that. I have to say that my board of directors has been really, really supportive of this activity that we're undertaking at the Volunteer Action Center. They see the value to the community of these relationships and so are willing to have us invest our time to do that.
Wonderful.
The stories, I think anytime Jane brings up student placements at some of these group meetings, you know, it's always a lively discussion. And I think it's because, again, the back is sort of this non-threatening entity where they can feel open, there's a relationship there. And we get everything from, we had one bad experience and we don't want students ever again, to it's an integral part of our HR strategy, and then everything in between. And for me, it's so interesting to hear, and so I can hear what's working, what's not working, why people welcome students, why people don't welcome students, etc. And so again, that more informal and trust that Jane talks about is really helpful to us as well, to learn about what the community needs in terms of student engagement.
And what I think is really important to that is that our members feel comfortable in saying, you know what, don't let any of the funders come to the table today, or don't let the universities come to the table today, because we want to be able to talk openly. And so I just open the door and say, sorry, you're not invited today, and that's fine. And they understand there's no disrespect intended. It's about open communication.
Wonderful. So we did have another question come in from Allison Stephen, and she says, the first part of my question is technical. The second part is more one of quality, or how the distinction is made. So the question is, wondering how the post-secondary institutions and the Volunteer Action Center connect their databases of volunteer service learning opportunities, and what kind of distinctions are made on the platform between pure volunteering and mandated service, internships, practicums, etc.
Well, I can start that. We were very fortunate back in 2004 to receive some funding and to hire a research group out of the University of Waterloo to develop an online platform for us and database. And in I think it was about 2007, during the early stages of the micro and macro groups, it was really decided that for Wilfrid Laurier, they wanted our system to be able to talk to their system, if you will. And so energy was expended. We brought both groups together, both our IT teams, and they built the API. I don't know I keep hearing what that means and how it's defined, but I just stick with API because I can't remember the exact terminology. But they built the API for us so that our systems could talk to each other. It was really so that our member agencies, the community organizations, would only have to post something once, and it would be displayed wherever and to as many audiences as possible. And so how do we delineate? Actually, each one of our member organizations has the choice where they post any position that they post with us. So 100% of the positions are posted on the Volunteer Action Center side, but they had the choice as to whether it was an appropriate position for a university student placement. So they don't have to, it's not just you put it into the Volunteer Action Center system and it's automatically in Wilfrid Laurier's system. We had some tools that the Laurier Center for Community Service Learning at the time helped us to, come up with some questions that would help delineate which positions might be more attractive for university students. And so that helps, it's built into the forms in our system to allow us to do that.
And when community organizations come onto our platform, which is also, again, now going to be linked with the Volunteer Action Center, they can indicate their interest, whether it's practicum, internship, volunteer, co-op, career center, etc. And then we connect them with the right contact within our institution to then post those opportunities. And as well, when they go to post an opportunity themselves, they can check off which program they're posting for. Certainly, there is some growing pains as we implement this for community service learning, but where we might have them post as a volunteer opportunity, a co-curricular rather than a CSL. But that's why we're all under this career and experiential learning umbrella now, so that we can have a more coordinated effort to serve partners in that respect.
Great. Well, we're coming near the end, but I just want to see if there's anything else that that any of you would like to add at this point.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess we're at the end of our webinar today, and I would like to thank our presenters for their wonderful presentations, and also our attendees for your active engagement in this webinar. And I'll send out a reminder that the link to the webinar video will be sent out within 24 to 48 hours. And I also encourage you all to sign up for CFICE's newsletter if you haven't already done so. So that's the Community First Impacts of Community Engagement newsletter, to hear all about future CFICE webinars. So thank you again for attending, and have a great day.